Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. I am your host, Blaine Bartlett. Um, the notion of how would I put this? Relationships, the notion of authenticity, the notion of a spirit that is imbuing anything with a life force that gets expressed
Mm.
through its form. That's kind of the nature of and the focus of the soul of business, because a business has got a soul, from my perspective. And those of you that have listened to this show, and thank you for that, by the way. You've heard me talk about this a lot, that everything has got a soul as far as I can tell. And the expression of that soul is either constricted or enhanced. And what we're looking at here is, as a business, and I'll just cut this in the context of a business. If you can tap into the soul of your business, which is usually present and very visible when the founding of the business is underway, it gets a little bit covered up as things start to migrate and you start to grow, and all of a sudden the focus of the business becomes the business, not the soul of what it was about to begin with. You start losing that competitive, that competitive advantage, that unique thing that made you what you are. All of that being said, my guest today, Tina Parker, is I first met Tina in an office hours show that I was doing with my good friend and partner David Meltzer, and we've got a 10-minute little segment that we work with in these shows, and she opened up a box of all kinds of stuff that I went, 10 minutes? You've got to be kidding me. There is no way in hell that we're going to get where we need to go in 10 minutes. So I was so intrigued. I invited her on the show, and she graciously accepted right away and immediately booked a time slot so that I could just jump into this. Tina is, the founder of a company called Lead Outside the Lines, and we're going to talk about that because there's some very interesting implications to that. She's a retired Air Force lieutenant colonel, a former C-level executive in a pretty significant business. She's a business owner, and more importantly, she understands what resilience is about. And this is something that I think is really important because it's linked closely to authenticity. And there's a couple of areas here that I think are going to be ripe for conversation and ripe for discussion. So without further ado, I want to welcome Tina Parker to the show. Tina, it's great to have you here.
Thank you, Blaine. It's so great to be with you today.
Well, the idea of leading outside the lines. Usually I'll ask a question about the soul of business, but I'm going to come to that in a minute here. But leading outside the lines, what's that notion about for you, and how have you built a company around that? Because lead outside the lines is actually quite successful.
Absolutely. The notion of lead outside the lines is really a lot of what you just spoke to, right? Being aligned with who we are, the soul of who we are at our being, right? And not being so conditioned and constricted by the conditioning, right? A lot of us, we all do. We get conditioned in life just by being in the world, right? And we can lose touch, just like you talked about with a business. Like in the beginning, the founders are very close to the soul of the business. But as it grows, just as we grow in life, right, we get conditioned, we get things piled on top of us, we get stuck in these boxes that we think we're supposed to be in to be successful, quote unquote. And so Lead Outside the Lines is really about helping people get back to the core of what does the definition of success mean for you? And are you living and leading in alignment with that definition? Or are you chasing a definition that doesn't fit you anymore? Or maybe never did?
Yeah. And one of the things I discovered real early on in my life was that my parents' definition of success did not match where I thought I needed to be going and actually what I felt I wanted to be doing in my life. And they were wise enough to actually, loosen the leash considerably. Yeah, I don't know that I've told this story to anybody. Well, it's actually written down in a couple of areas. But I remember my mother sat me down when I was 12 years old, and we grew up as Protestant, from a religious upbringing. And Mom sat me down when I was 12, and said, look, Dad and I have given you access to what we understand is the important pieces about a religious education. This is, and this is my paraphrasing of what she said. She said, it's what we've known. What we also know is that there is a lot more out there than what you have been exposed to and than what we even are aware of. So you don't have to go to Sunday school anymore. You don't have to come to church with us anymore. You get to make your own decision about how this portion of your life actually is going to look from this point forward. And I remember sitting there going, huh? Really? And I literally, honest to God, no pun intended here. I never went back to Sunday school. I never went back to the formal church. It was kind of like, and I'd been chafing a little bit about around it at that time. But I started this exploration: Buddhism, Sufism. I got into the Kabbalah for a while. I went to a Zen monastery in Japan and sat silently for a long time. But just started exploring all kinds of stuff. The single greatest gift I ever got from my parents, I think, was the trust, number one, that I would do something intelligent with this kind of freedom, but also just the freedom to move outside the lines, that they knew about. In your work, you're a retired lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. And if you talk about places that have tradition and have lines and have boxes to fit in,
oh yeah.
How did you, and this is where the notion of authenticity and resilience comes into mind for me here. How did you actually, and I think you did, actually thrive in that environment? What'd you do? How did you approach it?
It's really interesting because growing up, so I was born into the Air Force. That's what I say. My dad served, my grandfather served, right? But it wasn't until I was halfway through college that I even ever thought about it. It just wasn't on my radar, right? My awareness radar. But when I joined, it was really out of a sense of, I know that world and I don't know what I'm going to do with my life, right? I think in college, a lot of us get to that point. But what it did for me was it challenged me in ways that I would not have challenged myself. It gave me some structure, but within that structure, I still brought who I was to the table. And I will say, I get it honestly. My dad is the same way. Yes, my dad served for 20 years, but he was in marketing and he had like these 2-foot plastic crayons that hung from his ceiling. And when people would come in it was so amazing. When people would come in his office and they start complaining and getting stuck in the box, right? He would point up to the ceiling and he's like, turn around and come back when you can color outside the lines and figure out a solution. Right.
Really?
And so, yes. And he just was him. Right. And so I think I learned at an early age that when we do bring, even when we feel like it's a little uncomfortable, we do bring our authenticity to the table, it actually allows other people to do the same, especially when we're in a situation like the military. It's very bureaucracy, red tape, right? Stay within the line, toe the line, like all the line things are there. But when I was most successful and when my teams were most successful, it was because we created a space where each of us got to bring our genius and each of us got to throw out ideas and maybe perspectives that were outside the lines, right? But there was no judgment around it. It was curiosity around, okay, well, how might that work? Right? Instead of going, been there, tried that, that'll never work, right? We get stuck when we get in that mindset of judgment and staying inside the box. Yeah. But when we can get curious and allow space for others to do the same, things flourish.
I love that. And I love the crayons. I mean, that just the visual of that. So early on, getting outside the lines was part of your whole world.
Yes.
So this
even
didn't just...
inside the lines, inside the box, it was still outside the lines. Yeah.
Leaders cause movement, and everybody's a leader by that definition. I mean, because it's impossible to be in a system and not cause somebody to move to accommodate your presence. So the question about am I a leader or not is irrelevant. The question that I really kind of play with is, are you effective? And then that question becomes an interesting one. when you couple it with movement? Are you getting the kind of movement you need to get the result that you say you want? And where I'm going with this is there's an embedded question here. The notion of how I show up as a leader. Yeah, for years I've taught people, leadership skills. For 40 years I've been working in this developmental arena called leadership, and very, very early on, truly, the leader sets the ceiling for what their people will end up doing, and we talk about a glass ceiling, we talk about all of these other ceilings, but if you talk, if you think about it in terms of leaders as an exemplar of something, what are they actually being a symbol of? Are you a symbol of the vision that you want to produce? Are you a symbol of the kind of movement that you want to have, the risk taking, whatever it might be in your organization, the innovation, the creativity? In the clients that you work with, and you've got a very specific way of working here because, folks, I'm going to fill a background piece in here right now. So excuse me as I just kind of look aside here, those of you that are watching the show. TEDx speaker, obviously. That just kind of comes with the territory. But Great American Speak Off semifinalist, MA in Leadership and Management with a certification in neuroencoding, as well as brain health, transformational mindset facilitation, human-centered design. I love that one. DISC. I started working with DISC back in the 90s. I'm going to date myself here. But this idea of continual growth as a leader, of expansion, of curiosity, of going outside the lines. How do you work with your clients? How does your firm work with your clients to actually facilitate that process?
Yes. And the way we work with folks is that we got a framework that we work folks through called SCALE. And I love that you brought up the certifications, because really it's not about the certification. It's about why I chose to go down that road, right? Because I'm the why girl. I grew up like, why does that work? And I'm just fascinated by what makes people tick and what ticks them off, right? Like, what is it that gets them going? And so SCALE really came about because of my experience in the Air Force, right? And I think we talked about this on David's show, was AFWorks, the Air Force Innovation Catalyst.
Yep.
Right? We were charged with doing things differently. And it was in 2020. So 19 and 2020, we all know what happened in 2020. We all had to do things differently with COVID, right? And so what we did is we set the stage as leadership for airmen to have a voice, the up and comers in the Air Force who were new and said, why do we do it the way we do it? Right? They still had that questioning mind, right? And we set the stage for that. We set the stage for small businesses and garage tinkerers to want to do business with the red tape, bureaucracy, military, right? And so it was really about how do we bring more minds to the table and create a space for all of them to share their individual, authentic perspective, because we don't know what we don't know, right? And so that's the approach that we take at Lead Outside the Lines with the SCALE framework, is with each individual or with teams and organizations, it works the same because people are people, right?
Yeah.
And so we help them tap into their structure, their inner wiring. And that's where the neuroencoding and brain health comes from. It's like, how are we wired as people and what makes us tick? Then we go into the clarity around your vision, right? You talked about vision, clarity around vision and what do you really want to create? What is your identity? How do you fit into this vision? And then it's alignment is the A. Are you aligned with the purpose, the vision, the definition of success, right? For this endeavor, for your life, for the business you want to create, whatever it is, you've got to be in alignment, or you're hitting that downward spiral of reactivity and burnout. And that's where the leadership comes in, the creative, conscious leadership, right? When we are not in alignment, it's not about all the doing. And I think a lot of us get misguided, right? We think, oh my gosh, I had so much on my plate. That's why I'm overwhelmed and stressed out. No, it's not. If all those things on your plate were aligned with your personal definition of success and what makes you tick, that gives you energy and creativity. So it's not about the doing, it's about the being. And that's where I think a lot of leaders go astray, is they get away from who they're being and start doing all the things they think they're supposed to do.
Yep.
Right. And then the E is engagement. And that's when we get off track, engagement goes off track with ourselves, our lives, and our people.
Yeah, I love where this is going. I mentioned that I sat Zazen, in Japan at the monastery, and spent hours just sitting. And the whole idea of Buddhism, and not the whole idea, but a major component of Buddhism, Buddhist philosophy, is that suffering is ecumenical. I mean, it's the human condition, and it's a consequence of attachment. Now, that has been almost handed by Moses, to mix some metaphors here, as a reality. And it makes sense. Cognitively, it makes sense. I was actually meditating on this earlier this week, and I don't believe it's true.
Right.
Yeah, then this is where this beingness thing comes into play. I think suffering is the consequence of being separate from source. To being separate from source. And because I feel separate from source, however I define source, I attach to externalities. I attach to a goal thinking, well, that thing out there will bring me the wholeness that I'm missing inside. So this notion of authenticity, what am I left? It's what I'm left with when I stop trying to impress you or stop trying to manage your perception of who I am. I mean, that's what authenticity is. At the end of the day, the distillation of that, I'm just being. And that being is me connected to source that is moving to and through me, and it expresses through me. So suffering is the detachment. It's the consequence of separation. The consequence of separation. And we suffer in businesses. And this is really kind of where my meditation thread kind of ran. When I started doing consulting 40 some odd years ago, it was struck me very quickly that most organizations I worked with were toxic to the human spirit. Most organizations were just not healthy places to live in. Because they seem to be, I didn't have this language at that time, but they seem to be detached from the soul of the business, the soul that, enlivened it, that gave it that life. I love what you talk about and how you actually organize around this, because I've got a hunch, in the conversations that you hold with your clients, a lot of it comes back to connection, relational connection. Is that a fair assessment on my part?
Oh, for sure. In fact, it's one of the 4 C's that we talk about in the leadership portion is connection, right? And it is first to ourselves, to source, right? When we are not connected to ourselves and who we are and what we bring to the world, or we're trying to hide parts of that, right? People feel it. So it affects the connection that we don't make with others, right? Because they feel this dissonance. They're like, you're not quite, like, you're saying the right thing, but there's something that I just don't feel like I'm aligning with you. Like, something's not right.
Yeah.
Right?
We've got an exquisite bullshit detector built in. We really do.
A lot of times we don't have the words for it, right? So we may not be able to say, I don't trust you because of XYZ.
Mm-hmm.
But we have this innate feeling as human beings, because everything is energy, right? We are giving off energy. People are receiving it from us. They're giving us their own. And when those things are not aligned, it's like, okay, it's like the 2 magnets, right? It can't come together because they're opposing. And you can't say exactly why sometimes, but you feel it.
Yeah.
And so that's where I feel like that authenticity comes in, is, look, not everyone's going to like you. You don't want everyone to like you, honestly. I mean, if you want to be honest about it, right? Be you, and the people and the opportunities. And here's the other piece too, the opportunities that are aligned with who you are and where you're really strong and what you care about. Those will naturally be more magnetized to you when you're authentic. When you're not, those are like, I can't find you because I don't really know where you are, who you are, what you're about.
Yeah.
And you keep struggling and suffering.
I can't find you. That, I mean, yeah. the the idea of uniqueness, yeah, and I don't mean this in the sense of isolation or anything else. It's just, yeah, I'm a unique human being. My company is a unique entity. But if it gets lost in the noise because we try to match to what the market is seemingly asking for, and yeah, and this is the whole commoditization of our product or our service line. It becomes, now it's a question of price point as opposed to uniqueness. And I'm following a thread here. The purpose of a business is to deliver. I mean, in one sense, a product or a service. I mean, but that has to be rooted in something that is designed to bring delight to the
Yeah.
person that is actually consuming it. And if you're
Yes.
bringing delight, if that's what you're doing, the money will handle itself. So
100%.
that's in a product service, kind of marketing mindset. As a leader, how do I bring delight to the folks that I'm working with? And it doesn't mean, and I'm picking up on your point here about they don't have to like you. As a matter of fact, if everybody likes you, you're probably doing something wrong.
Absolutely.
But I think when we start unbundling, what's the experience of delight really about?
Mm,
That gets to be an interesting question for leaders, I think, to explore. Yeah, how do people feel about themselves when they're in my presence?
exactly. That's it. That's
And
it. And do they feel that they can bring their whole selves to the table, that they can bring their best, that they can maybe not be perfect all the time, right? Because perfection will keep you in the box. It'll keep you from creating what needs to be created. Right.
yeah.
And a lot of things that we see with folks now is like people are like, I want to stop solving problems that happened yesterday. I want to start looking ahead for solutions that are coming. Organizations want that, yet we still function and treat our people in a way that keeps them from stepping outside the lines, from taking risks,
Yeah.
from going, hey, I'm looking at this thing down the line. Are you paying attention to this? Right? They go, well, I don't want to get in trouble or nope, never mind. I'll just keep it to myself. Right. And so
Yeah.
as leaders, it's our responsibility to create space to flourish. Each and every person. Like that's what we do. We create a space for innovation, creativity, for things to happen. And they die on the vine when we're in judgment.
Yes. The nature of life is evidenced in nature. Nature grows, and all of nature honors the desire to be more, to have more, and to do more. Life thrives when it's allowed to grow. And ideally, thriving is what we also, all of us, want to be able to do. Unfortunately, at some stage in life, most people find themselves settling into what I can only call a rut. And a rut is nothing more than a coffin with the ends kicked out. You want to quickly get out of any rut that you find yourself in. When you stop growing, that's when the coffin starts to appear. The simple truth is this, and this is true for everything in nature. You're going to die. I'm going to die. Every one of us dies. So the question we need to come to grips with is not, are we going to die? The question nature asks us to answer is, are we truly living? That's what motivation is about. It's the desire to move. It's the desire to grow and to excel. Have I lived? How have I lived? I'd love for you to take advantage of my Leadership Mindset Masterclass. It's all about providing you with the tools to ensure thriving for yourself and for those around you. Register today to receive the free introduction video and find out more about this acclaimed program. You'll also receive a copy of my international #1 bestseller, Compassionate Capitalism, A Journey to the Soul of Business. I'm Blaine Bartlett, and I look forward to helping you thrive. That notion of judgment, another word for that is an assessment, right, wrong, good, bad, that sort of thing. And there's a whole linguistic domain that Fernando Flores has worked with. And Fernando Flores used to be the economic minister in Allende's Chile. And after the coup, he was imprisoned for a number of years. But he's a linguist. He is absolutely one of the most brilliant people I've ever met. And he did a lot of work, and the reason I'm bringing this up here has to do with the nature of assessment. He did a lot of work with a fellow by the name of Werner Erhard. And Werner gained a lot of notoriety back in the 1970s when he started a company called EST. And EST was one of the pioneers in the human potential movement, which is kind of where I cut my teeth back in the early 70s. I worked in that area for a number of years. But the idea of reality, language creates and reflects reality. It does both. And the idea of assessments, judgments, as far as I can tell, either open or close possibilities. And the job of a leader is to introduce possibilities to people so that something else becomes possible.
Yeah,
literally.
exactly. Yeah.
What do you find is the most difficult piece in the work that you do with your clients to actually move people away from the reliance that we seem to have as human beings on right, wrong, good, bad thinking, which is assessment, judgment-based structures?
Yes. There's a couple of things. One thing I will say is we teach both and, or I can feel this too, right? We try to put ourselves on one side of the line or the other. And when we do that, that's when we shut down possibilities, right? And so someone says, well, I can either go to the gym or I can work, right? Or I can either do this or I can do that. It's like, how can we do both, right? How might we? Right. So the question, if we can start off questions with how might I, or how might we, it opens up your brain. And this is why I love the brain health and neuroencoding piece of this is your brain actually functions differently, right? Your brain is like, think of it as a Google search engine, right? What you put in, you get out. So if you're struggling in business or making money and you go, why am I not making money? That's the question that we ask ourselves, right? Our critical self-doubt that's in there, right? Well, the response you get is, well, because you didn't do this and you didn't do that, you didn't follow it. And like, that's not helpful. That just keeps you stuck. Right? It's like, yeah, I know I didn't do that. Thanks. Right. But if you can ask the question in a different way and go, how might I create an opportunity to create more money, to meet more people, right? Then your brain starts saying, oh, that's the question. Okay, well, so-and-so over here who can do this. Well, what if we did this? It opens up possibilities just by the words that we use, because words create worlds. We create our own world based on the words that we say to ourselves, and then that translates to what we say to others.
Words create worlds. I have not heard anybody actually use that alliteration before. I love it. I'm going to steal it.
Take it. I think I stole it from somebody too, right?
Good. I'm writing it down here, actually. Words create worlds. A world that I want to explore with you a little bit has to do with the nature of this book over my right shoulder here, Compassionate Capitalism. And compassion is a behavior. I mean, compassion is behavior. It's not a feeling. It's a behavior that is rooted in the experience of being connected. So, if I feel connected to something, I will typically behave in a manner that suggests there's compassion, there's care involved here. And the word I want to play with a little bit here has to do with generosity. And it's different than gratitude. It's different than being gracious. But being generous. When you think about generosity in the work that you do with your clients, do you have some examples where generosity has actually been kind of the silver bullet that shifted something in a way that was significant and unexpected?
Oh my goodness. Yes. And I love this notion of generosity because that comes from a place of abundance. inside of
Absolutely.
us
Yep.
instead of scarcity,
Yep.
right? And I think a lot of times, like, especially when we get in business and we work with this with our clients too, is are you trying to carve out a piece of your pie, or are you trying to create a bigger pie
Aye.
so that everyone gets more? Right. That opens up a completely different way of approaching people, of approaching collaboration instead of competition,
Mm-hmm.
right? And of being generous with your time and your wisdom. Like, a lot of us don't feel like we have anything to share. It's like, who's going to listen to me? No,
Yeah.
you don't have to be generous with money all the time. Be generous with your wisdom and time and holding space for other people to step into their brilliance. Like, all of this is generous to create a better space and a better world around us. Right. And that's really what leaders do. And I think we get stuck sometimes in, well, being generous means I gave money or I gave like a specific tangible thing. Generosity is not transactional.
Spot on. It
And
is
this
not
is where it's not a
transactional.
tit for tat. It's not a, well, I gave this, you get, no, you don't do it to get something. You do it because it's part of who you are. And when more of us are aligned with that way of being, everything gets better. It's like rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, Tina, I love this. I love this. And speaking of generosity, you've got a master class coming up that I'd like you to speak a little bit to. Because folks, those of you that are listening, if you want to notice what's in your system that you can actually leverage, this masterclass may be a place for you to actually dip your toe in the water a little bit here, so to speak. And I'm not going to, speaking of big feet here, I'm not going to walk all over this thing. So why don't you just give us a little teaser on what this masterclass is about? It's called Scale Up, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It's called Scale Up, go from stuck to unstoppable, because sometimes we don't know why we're stuck. Right. And so it's a 23-minute masterclass, completely complimentary. It just gives you an overview and gives you some questions and things that you can start doing right now in your life to get unstuck. Right. And so we go through the Scale Up framework. So first, we're going to make sure that you understand tapping into yourself. That's the biggest piece. Because one thing I will share along that line, because you asked about some of the clients we work with, I was working with a very successful venture capitalist, and he wanted to create a whole new venture firm based on deep tech because he's an expert, right? But he wasn't doing what he knew he needed to be doing, but he knew how to do it. He just wasn't doing it. Well, that structure piece, the S, was so important because your thoughts, feelings, and beliefs drive the actions that you take. And for him, he didn't realize there was a limiting belief that he had about talking about himself. He said, oh, people who talk about themselves are jerks. I'm not going to do that. Like, well, of course you're not going out there and sharing because you're not a jerk, right? So when we were able to connect that belief that he held, literally in 2 weeks after going, okay, I need to share my knowledge with folks. It's not about me. It's about sharing my knowledge with people. 2 investors came out of the woodworks who had been sitting on the sidelines for years, and they started this new fund. And it literally was just understanding what is that thing inside that's keeping me stuck, right? Yeah. And so we go into that, and then it's about clarity of your VIPs, your vision, your identity, your purpose, and success, your personal definition. Right? We talked about that earlier. Mm-hmm. And then we talk about how the alignment works. When you're in alignment, this is when things open up for you. And the L for scale, we go into this in masterclass, is leadership, but conscious leadership. Getting out of that downward reactive spiral and helping shift ourselves into a creative upward spiral. And then it's engagement. Because literally, if you have a vision that's big enough, you can't do that by yourself. So we've got to engage other people, right? And engagement magnetizes opportunities to you that are aligned and opens up doors and possibilities that you wouldn't normally see. So I'd love for folks to go and do the masterclass, 23 minutes. It's not a big lift, heavy lift, right? And really just assess, where am I in this whole process of being completely aligned to be able to step in and take bold action, even in the midst of uncertainty? That's what it would help folks do.
Love it. Where can they find out about it?
Yes. So bit.ly, bit.ly/masterclass-scale up. You can go there, and hopefully we'll be able to put it in the show notes to help people get to it easily. And I'd love to connect with folks and through the masterclass if you want to connect back. I'm on LinkedIn as well, so love to chat with folks and just help. That's really what Lead Outside the Lines is about. Just break out of the definition that's keeping you stuck.
And the website, your website is actually literally leadoutsidethelines.com. So that'll go in the show notes as well. Yeah.
Yes.
And
Blaine, this has been just a fabulous conversation. I love your perspective on so many of these things.
Oh, Tina, same. I knew this was going to be just a rockin' show. Truly, this has been great. Folks, thank you for listening. Tina Parker has been my guest today, the founder and CEO of Lead Outside the Lines. Take her up on her offer to join her masterclass. Check it out. I think you will be pleasantly surprised, and there will be a lot of takeaways that you can immediately start to implement. I will go out on a limb and promise that for you. Okay.
I know there will be. There always is.
Okay. And as we come to a close here, folks, this is my regular admonition at the end of the show here. Find a way in your life to become a center of distribution, not a center of accumulation. When you're working from that perspective, life will work for you, as life should. Okay? Life should work for us. Design a life that works for you. And I'll see you on the next show. Take care.